Now this week, we're going to dive deeper into a moment we've all experienced, when we feel like God has let us down. These are times when we feel like God hasn't delivered on the promises he made, or when he allows major problems to disrupt our lives and shatter our hopes and dreams. We set our hearts on a future path, and suddenly everything goes awry. God doesn't seem to answer our cries or deliver what we desperately hoped for. It is in these moments that we wrestle with this question: why, God? Why did you let that happen? When our prayers go unanswered and our hopes seem to crumble, it's easy to start doubting God's goodness. We may wonder if he's even forgotten us. He's not really as faithful as he promised, so we think. It's in these painful moments that we find ourselves in a similar situation, emotional place as Abraham, the main character in today's Genesis story. But before we jump into this story, let's first look at a broader context. In the beginning, God created the world and saw that it was good. But quickly, things take a dark turn. In Genesis 3, the fall of mankind begins with Adam and Eve and their disobedience. Immediately, the ripple effect begins to spread. Sin, evil. Cain kills Abel, and humanity spirals into a giant corruption. By Genesis 6, the sin and the evil of the world had become so overwhelming that suddenly God grieved his creation. So he decided to send a flood and wipe them all out, sparing only Noah and his 3 sons. But something significant happens here. There always is something significant. Despite wiping out all the evil people and starting fresh with Noah and his family, evil doesn't disappear. So what's up with that? The flood didn't solve the problem of sin, because sin is rooted so deeply in the human heart, it's not easy to flood out. So we may wonder, why doesn't God just remove all the evil people from the world right now? That's got to be easy to do. Why does he allow suffering and pain and war and famine to persist right now? Why doesn't he wipe it out? Genesis tells us that God already tried that approach. It didn't work with the flood. But he thought of a more profound solution. This solution wasn't going to be another flood, because we learned that the rainbow showed us that God's covenant was with us and wouldn't choose to flood us again. He chose to work through a relationship of just one person. And that person, luckily enough, was Abraham. God approaches Abraham, and we learn the truth about Abraham. Abraham's wife Sarah was barren. They were childless. And in their time, being childless was a deep source of pain and identity loss. Unlike our culture today, we choose to put our things and our identity in our jobs, our reputations, and personal fulfillment. But for Abraham and Sarah, their legacy, their future, was all worth in having children. Without a child, there would be no lasting impact on the world. So here's what God does. God speaks to Abraham and makes him 3 promises. First promise is, I will make you a great nation. Second, I will bless you. And third, I will make your name great. They sound great, don't they? For Abraham, these promises pointed to one thing. God was going to give him a son. And out of that son would come a nation that would bless the entire world. But there's a catch. Abraham was already old, and Sarah was barren. Despite God's promises, they saw no way forward. They faced a deep and unmet longing, and the waiting for this seemed endless. Doesn't that sound familiar to you and I? How many of us have been in this place? We're waiting for God to come through on his promises, waiting for healing, waiting for provision, waiting for peace or a breakthrough. but feel that time is running out, God is silent. Abraham's journey is strikingly similar to us. We often come with our hopes and dreams, expecting God to fulfill them on our time, in our way. But when God doesn't respond as we expect, we start to question God, don't we? But here's the deeper truth. In those moments of delay and disappointment, God is teaching us something. He's teaching us to trust him, even when we can't see the answers. He's teaching us that he is more interested in a relationship with us, with him, than any simple act of prayer or asking for things. But like Abraham, we often hedge our bets. We might trust God, but we don't fully surrender to him. We try to take control, maybe even work things out on our own because we're all powerful just like God, right? But God doesn't give up on us. He patiently leads us back to faith, back to trust. He doesn't condemn us for our doubts, but instead invites us to lean on him. How wonderful is that? Abraham's journey shows that the trust in God isn't about receiving the answer we want when we want it. Trust is about believing in God's plan that is greater than our own. And even when it feels like God has forgotten us, you know what? He's still working in ways we cannot see. God doesn't rebuke Abraham for asking tough questions. In fact, God listens. When Abraham expresses his doubts, God doesn't get angry. Instead, he gives him a sign. And what is that sign? We heard it in the reading. God takes Abraham outside, asks him to look at the stars, a sky filled with countless numbers of stars, a reminder that we can see how God is working in us. His promises are all still true. God tells Abraham, your descendants will be as numerous as the stars in the sky. In that moment, God reassures Abraham that his promise is still in effect, even though it seems impossible. I think in the same way, we may always see the fulfillment of God's promises right away. But God is teaching us to trust in him, even in the waiting. He's teaching us that his faithfulness is not contingent upon circumstances. When we trust in him, it's credited to us as righteousness. Just as any meaningful relationship is built on trust, our relationship with God is built on trust and faith. So when life feels like it's falling apart and we find ourselves asking, seriously, God? You've let me down. Maybe the better question is this: what is God teaching me in this moment? What is he inviting me to learn about? How is he deepening my relationship with him, even through our pain? Now, God allows storms in life. He never promised a rose garden. Not because he's punishing us, but because he wants to deepen our faith and teach us to trust in him. He wants to bless us, but we must have a firm foundation to be able to handle the blessings. Without that, we may crumble under the weight of them. So I'll leave you with these few questions. What problems are we facing today? What seems to be keeping us away from our dreams and our hopes? When you find yourself asking, why God, remember that it's okay to vent to him, to express your pain and disappointment. I think God can handle it. But then also ask, what God, what are you teaching me in this moment? Help me to grow in trust and faith so I can be a faithful child of yours, ready to receive all the blessings that you want to give to me.